Thank you, Taryn. And everybody, thank you for joining. This, I know it's a tech talk. Get ready for something slightly unconventional. One of the funnest thing you can do is have a conversation with a lot of people, share their input. So I encourage that. If I say something or you see something that you say, hey, wait a minute, this makes sense, or I've seen something very similar, please, I'd love to hear what you have in mind. So if you came here just for technology, yes, we will talk some technology. I'm sorry to disappoint. This is what I do every day, by the way. Just right now is helping somebody solve a TLS problem so I can get as deep as you like. But then I do find these conversations very interesting. And a lot of the technologists that I've been speaking with over the past 2 weeks in preparation for this talk said, man, this was really nice talk we had. So yeah, please don't be shy, guys. It's not a lecture, so please participate. The slides will be a guide, so please make this a happy hour. I will take notes. I will share my slides afterwards. There's plenty of references that I will cite. And yeah, let's have some fun, shall we? So if you can't make it through the entire talk for some reason, or you just want to know the bottom line up front, which is what that bluff is, the answer to the question is, what can microservices tell us about organizations? The answer is mostly things we should know. And those things, I'll cover some of them based on the experience that I've seen, and maybe some new things. So, and this is the part where I welcome, your feedback, welcome your observations. The inspiration for this, or the reason I like those talks very much is when I first started working, I was working for a company doing software development. I was doing quality assurance at the time, and I really wanted to do software development, even though I had a degree in computer science. Your first job out of college, they're not going to let you write code, although maybe they will now. So I bought this book, UML in a Nutshell, and I was surprised that initially the book was not talking about at all, developing software as much as it is talking about process and tasks and organizations. And it gave me this big, huge moment of clarity into this whole idea of developing software. So it was not a technical issue at all. So that was one experience that I had that made me open up to this. Also known as, wow, mind blown. Wow, I didn't think of it that way. So maybe this is a point of question for you guys. For me, it was just realizing, the way that which organizations work. Anyone can share any moment of clarity when they said, oh, wait a minute, I was working for the government and profit was not an issue. And now all of a sudden I'm working for a private sector. Well, wait a minute, you mean we actually, we have to do this profitably? I see a thumbs up flying. So yeah, moments of clarity are really nice. And another one happened from this gentleman. This is Dave Thomas. If you lived in the Midwest, as I did, around the the aughts, as they say, no fluff, just stuff. And actually, they still operate today. Really nice conferences, very good material and topics that they cover. Dave Thomas had two talks that legitimately affected me in my career. Here was the first one, developing expertise. And he drew a parallel between how in the healthcare industry, they had some serious issues with errors and this is people's lives on the line. So they started interviewing doctors and nurses, and they came up with very similar observations, very similar comments to how architects and business users and quality assurance folks and end users talk. And Dave Thomas, of course, was leading the charge, or part of the many people leading the charge towards being agile and doing things in a different way. And not only was his talk about this, it was also about how do you build expertise and how do you become good at what you do over time, and whose responsibility was that? So what I got out of this talk is, it's my responsibility. It's not your manager's responsibility to get you good. Maybe that's a question for you, Sean. You naturally work in an environment which is, okay, it's commercial. It is high stress. Sometimes you get a good coach, but not always. What's your take? Whose responsibility is it to get good? Would you agree that it's 100% yours and no one else's?
Well, I would like to say that that's the case most of the time, right? I think we all have some accountability and responsibility for becoming better. But I think it's important in all of our careers to find a mentor and somebody who's willing to invest in our success just as much as we're vested in it. So it's always I think you become a lot more successful throughout your career if you can find somebody that is willing to spend a little bit extra time and take on that mentorship role.
Bingo, if you're lucky enough to find them.
Exactly right.
So I would say that's a minority of the time, and not all the time that happens. That's strange. I put my phone on silent, and yet I hear notifications. So yeah, so for some of the time you will be lucky you'll have the mentor. Most of the time you will not. And Dave Thomas gave me this moment of clarity. You look after your own career. Another thing he said was another topic or talk he gave was about cargo cults and angry monkeys. And the topic, think, what in the world does that have to do with technology? And you'd have to go watch it. So I will have that reference in the slides. Very, very good talk by Dave Thomas on cargo cults and angry monkeys. So let me tell you about the genesis, not the genesis, what's leading up to this talk I'm having. I've been working in technology for 20 years. I do have 3 degrees. One of them doesn't count, maybe because it's an MBA. Please don't hold that against me, but it's my curiosity towards business. And believe me, there's a lot of eye-opening moments if you want to study an MBA and get a business degree. I would recommend though you do it on a cheap, as in $10. Get the 10-day MBA book or something like that. You're not going to go spend $40,000, $80,000 for an MBA and to get the connections. I worked in North America, in Europe, in Africa, in Asia, which is you can say the Middle East. Lots of projects, lots more organizations. I've met a lot of people. Fortunately, I've had some successes and plenty of failures from which I learned. So that's my background, and my premise is the following. Or not the premise. The premise of microservices, not mine. If you talk to any organization right now, and I see this on a daily basis, and Sean, maybe you can chime in here. Oh, we want to go to Agile. We want to use containers. We're going to use Kubernetes. We're going to go to microservices. This thing is going to solve all our problems. It's going to even be a flamethrower. And it's going to meet our business needs, even if they can't articulate what the needs are. We're going to do it fast. We're going to do it without breaking the bank. It's going to be secure. It's going to be awesome. And I say, well, wait a minute. Does this sound familiar? Sean, what do you think, man? You go on those calls just like I do. You see people saying, we have to, by June of this year, we're going to have everything on containers and ready to go in the cloud and hybrid. It's like, yeah, sure, why not? What do you think, Sean?
Yeah, I think it's a great concept, right? I think the idea of containers and an agile environment is ultimately going to lead to a better end user experience. But I think what a lot of people are trying to understand is how to manage the complexities that come along with kind of decoupling these applications and moving to a hybrid multi-cloud type of architecture. And ultimately, it does help you innovate faster, but I think it adds a lot of additional concerns, especially around a security perspective, when we're thinking about all these additional gaps and entry points that you now have in the environment. So it's an interesting concept. I think a lot of times there needs to be a good business reason to do this to enable the technical folks to go out and invest, intelligently in these concepts.
100%. And it's trying to solve a certain thing. It's trying to meet the business needs, do it on time, do it on budget, do it secured, like you said. And like every other technology, it has, it needs care and feeding. There'll be a little bit of challenges over here, and there'll be later benefits over here. But you'll notice something. Having been as long as I have, remember these terms: enterprise service bus, EDI, electronic data interchange, just getting data to get passed around, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And watch this guy, Bill Gates, not this guy, one of the richest people, much smarter than me or anybody else. wrote a book before, in the last century, Business at the Speed of Thoughts. Hey, we're gonna, we can do things at the time you think it at Microsoft, and we're gonna get it done. And even today we have that. Every business is, trying to solve a problem, trying to do it fast. So you kind of take a step back. Here's one person who made me take that step back. Let me see if I see something in the chat. Oh, from Taryn. Alrighty. This gentleman, Asir Vemula Selvasian, I hope I pronounced that right. I worked with the guy, but I'm not like a native Hindi speaker. But you have those moments of clarity. So one time, Asir and me were talking, and he says, "Well, just having a new technology doesn't necessarily solve the problem. Maybe your problem is elsewhere." And he gave me this example. Think of something as benign as a calendar. You don't even think twice about it, Sean or Taryn. If I tell you, what's today, May 27th, you don't even think about it. But what if I told you that the Gregorian calendar, which is the de facto annual calendar that we're using, is just one approach, and it has its own issues? Take, for example, the fact that we have to add a day every 4 years. So let's set aside daylight saving time for now. But I think Pope Gregory deleted 12 days when he first started the calendar that weren't accounted for. That's why the Orthodox Church has Christmas in January versus what we have here in the USA. But do you know that there's a lunar calendar? There is a lunisolar calendar. There is a calendar which starts on the same day every year, like an annual calendar. Pre-annual calendar, and then they give you a leap week every once in a while. Have you heard of decimal time? So what am I getting at here? The problem is not the calendar, what calendar do you use. The problem is the perception of time. Yeah, and that transcends all the approaches you have to it. With me so far, Sean? Did I confuse everybody? Is this making sense to all of you? Because I'm about to, transpose this or overlay this to microservices. I'll give you another example. Thank you for the thumbs up, guys. I'll give you another example. Think of something as benign as money. You don't even think twice about it, do you? What if I told you that we're using paper money, and paper money, fiat currencies, have a 100% failure rate over time? What if I shock you and tell you the United States dollar lost, 97% of its value or something like that? Boom, moments of clarity. Okay, so finally, let me get to microservices. Regardless of the technology you use, you will have to contend with limitations that are not technological in nature. The problem is not technology. In this case, I'm going to cover some technologies that are human. In the slides, I put 2 articles from a gentleman from IBM, Kim Clark, who did a nice summary of point-to-point communication, or ESBs, and peer-to-peer networks in general. And he did a nice job overlaying the traditional ways in which we did communication point-to-point. And from there, the promise of SOA and how ESBs came about and how gateways came about, and finally how microservices came about. If you are familiar with this topic, fantastic. If not, don't you worry. The limitations that I'll talk about don't necessarily have to do so much with microservices. They really just have to do with information flow. Because what are organizations but basically a hierarchy of a network where information flows? With me so far, everybody? Sean, is this at all, is it too academic for you, my friend?
No, I think it's great. I think it's a good analogy to lead into the rest of the conversation.
Yeah. Microservices, APIs, flowing information, place this order, get me that information. Applications work as flowing information. So get this. This is Dr. Grzegorz Grochman. I met him working in the Middle East. He's a Polish gentleman. He is a doctor. His doctorate is in organization science, which I actually looked up today. He says, Dr. Grzegorz, but as I'm preparing for this meeting, I went out and found out he actually studied organizational science. And he worked for a company called IDS Shear. They were specialists in doing ERP implementations, and they got really good at it. Their success rates with ERPs, enterprise resource planning systems, think SAP and Oracle, basically applications as we know today, very high. And even today, if you look at the data from 2019, enterprise resource planning, there are about 2,000 ERP systems out there, last I checked. 60% of the projects fail. Most people are not happy. Most of them don't realize the gains from which they implemented the software in the first place. And they are barely, or more often than not on time and not on budget. Gregor's theory was this: if you want to know why they fail, it is because there is resistance when someone will no longer have the monopoly of information. So if you want to find out where this resistance will be, look no further than whichever person or persons have monopoly on information in the organization. And yep, Google Slides destroyed my slide, but let me see if I can do something to show it to you anyway. Can you guys see this? I think you can. Here we go.
Yep.
Okay.
Let's see.
Yeah, I did have a picture over here, but it disappeared. No worries. Let's go back to presenter view and let me know if you can see it. No, you cannot. Alrighty. So let me exit once more. Now, if you are building APIs and microservices today, and I'm really looking forward to hearing some feedback right now, who benefits and who loses from you creating APIs and microservices, guys? If you're working with this technology today, if you're working with Kong today, can you share with me stories where you have people resisting or people capitalizing on this type of stuff happening? I'm looking for some feedback here. Anyone whatsoever, if you're typing?
Yeah, give us feedback in multiple ways. Looks like there's one in the chat. You can also raise your hand. We can bring you to the stage.
Sam, would you, you don't have to disclose too much, Sam, if you would like. But if you're up for it, man, this is a meetup, and I was really hoping that some people would chat. Are you up to talking about it for a minute over video and sharing what you saw?
Here comes Sam. Hi, Sam. Can you hear us? I think you're good to go.
Can you all hear me?
Oh, yes.
Yes, we can.
Let's see the video. There we go. So, yeah, I mean, from an API consumption standpoint, our company, Expel, is a managed detection and response company. So we're kind of like a SOC as a service, and so we come to our customers with the security tools that they already have. And so APIs are hugely advantageous for us because our customers allow us to connect to their vendors' APIs using their credentials to pull their data and then aggregate it and bubble up meaningful alerts. So to me, looking at the API economy, if you will, which I know is kind of a term that was coined a little while back, I think if you're not looking at having an API these days to expose what you have, that you're doing yourself and probably your customers a disservice. We have an API that we expose. I would say that it's probably fairly lightly used at this point because I don't think there's a lot of integrators with us necessarily, but that's not to say that there won't be in the future. And so we actually still invest pretty heavily in the time that we put into exposing an API, documenting it well, giving customers access if they need it, things like that. So, looking at how APIs have proliferated, not having one these days seems to be a pretty big, detractor to your business.
100%. Here's a scenario to think of, man. And your actually business case is quite compatible with APIs because you're doing something with customers. And in fact, the moment you surface APIs, you bring your customers closer, you make it easier for them to do business with you. But here's one. What if your API will compete with another part of your business where I'm jumping ahead a little bit. You ever watch Office Space?
Absolutely.
Remember when Mike said they were going to do business online?
Yep.
Bingo. So that's a situation where you are basically having competing priorities in organization, which in this case, yeah, he's using a website, but it could have well been an API. Maybe it's a website and now someone will open up to a mobile app. So now let me go back. First of all, thank you so very much for sharing this, Sam. Really, really useful stuff. Let me now go back to sharing some stuff, and hopefully Google will behave itself. Alrighty, can you guys see my screen? Well, it says the slide is not visible. That's fine. Alrighty. So watch out in a situation like this when there are competing priorities in an organization where an API is behind them. If you have a situation where someone gets to win and someone gets to lose from an API being exposed, or for a microservice being exposed, or for information flow changing, it's about to go down. Get some popcorn. You're gonna witness some Game of Thrones stuff happening in your organization. Now, it turns out, like I said, this is an entire field of study, and it has some really interesting parts to it. And the next 30 minutes or next 20 minutes, let's try to cover some of them. But it's part culture, part psychology, part sociology, communication, power, and politics. In other words, if you talk to a 20-year-old Ahmed, none of that matters to me. And that was a big disservice to myself, because I came to find out that these things are extremely relevant. So my hope is that I will share with you what I've seen, these things that I've seen, and I hope you will benefit from them in your projects and for your organizations as well. Now, organizations are indeed complex. This show is highly successful. Can anyone take a guess why it's successful? By the way, it's based on the English version, and it's far more developed than the English version. We had more seasons in the USA than we did from the one that Gervais did in the UK. Anyone know why it's so successful? Take a guess. Sean? Would you watch it, Sean? I know Sam does.
I used to.
What did you like about it? What was it about The Office? I mean, it's a comedy. It's Aaron. You watched it too. What did you like about it?
It's relatable.
Yes. And it's sadly accurate. Yes. Yes. Why? The answer to that question comes in a 6-series blog post I read that changed the way I look at organizations. I think his name is Venkat Rao, Ribbon Farm. And I'll summarize as best as I can what he's thinking of. And I hope to not bum you out, guys. Seriously, you should look at this stuff with joy, not at all with any negativity. He says, in most organizations, they're run as a hierarchy. And at the bottom are the grunts like me and you, Sean. We're out there, we're front line, my friend. We're the ones that are creating value. And in an economy where you have the opportunity to start your own business, you've traded that opportunity for a steady paycheck, which is perhaps no longer steady. It's purely based on performance, and the anxiety is there. So we are called, in that article, losers. And then it depends on, by the way, this is the idea from the author. So please, again, I can't stress this enough. Don't take it negatively. If you overperform as a loser, then you get put into middle management. And that is Michael Scott. Michael Scott is an overperforming loser who got promoted into middle management. And he is known as the clueless. And his boss, of course, Jan Ganguly, she's a psycho, as are most of the execs in Dunder Mifflin. They are psychos. But there's more to it than that. Psychos at the top of the organizations, or sociopaths at the top of the organization, are able to identify other sociopaths who start off as losers, and they fast track them to the top of the organization. Guess who was one of those? Sam, I'm looking at you, buddy. You're going to know who that guy was who was a loser, and he was fast tracked to the top of the organization. We just mentioned him earlier. Remember, he went and got a business degree. Yes, that's him. Yes. Ryan, he wasn't good at sales. He was awful, right? He went in front of customers and completely goofed it up. And yeah, he got fast tracked to the top. So that's one view of organizations. Do read the article, see if it draws any parallels to what you're seeing. But it highlights the complexity of organizations and then patterns that emerge when you have such a hierarchy. And it's actually more interesting than that. Let's develop this a little bit more. It turns out that there's a language that different people use when they're talking to one another. So sociopaths, they use power talk. Power talk, if I can, very briefly summarize it, it's talk that has plausible deniability, that has something at stake. Yeah. Meaning that they're vague enough that you can read between the lines. And they're really, really good at this. Sociopaths are really good at this. It's what TV shows are made of. The clueless are the most fun to watch because they use posture talk to everybody. The losers ignore them, or actually the losers look at them and say, yeah, whatever, laugh. The sociopaths, don't mind them because they're a buffer between them and between the losers. And yeah, of course, we talk amongst each other in game talk. Sean, I hope I didn't bum you out, man. What do you think of all of this? Does any of this make sense to you? Are you going to go read that article at all? Taryn, I hope I'm not bumming anybody out.
I think you should drop that link in the chat so we can.
Yeah, I was going to ask the same thing. Tell us again the name of the article.
Ribbon Farm. Ribbon Farm, The Office According to The Office. But don't read it right now. It's a 6-part series. You can get it on, I think, Kindle Unlimited. It's free. I of course, bought it. But you can read it free on the website. So notice what's happening here is that there is an element of self-interest that everybody has. So the losers, what do you want to do? A lot of them are minimal efforts. I do enough not to get fired. I don't spend a lot of time at work. Someone bookmarked it. Thank you, Taryn. Yeah, the Gervais principle. And if you want to get a little bit more into learning this idea of power talk and transactional games, there's a book by Eric Byrne, Games People Play, and I think there was even a movie afterwards that was made about it. But really fascinating talk, and will open your eyes to how organizations work. But so that's one concept that I generally came to appreciate in hierarchy, and yeah, it exists everywhere. Don't get guys, if you're already in management, you probably already know this. I'm showing the game to people who don't know the game. Managers probably already know this and maybe didn't articulate it. Here's another concept. Incentives. Incentives are huge. Anyone read Freakonomics? Sean, Darren, Sam, anybody else?
On my list, I actually have not read it though. I forgot about that one.
So, not yet. Sam, you're gonna love this one then. If my wife had 3 children, all natural delivery. It turns out if we were in a city or during a time where the doctor doing the delivery is not so busy, her chances of getting a C-section will increase by 15%. What does that mean? Well, it means the doctor is going to collect more from insurance. I thought the doctors will make the best decision regardless of who's paying. Yeah. So, Steven and Steve demonstrated that incentives are very powerful, and no matter who you are, they play a role in what you do. And therefore, in organizations, that incentive is definitely there. Guess what happens in organizations? People are giving usually competing priorities. You increase revenue, you cut costs, you increase security, and managers are given limited resources. And as a result, you get an organization this natural competition and resistance that happens. Now, what you're looking at on the right-hand side is a model for change, and notice incentives is part of that change. And when you don't have all the ingredients, if you want to implement change, be that implementing microservices or APIs or doing any type of projects, you have to have all the ingredients. Where are we going to go? Do we have the people to make it happen? Is everyone aligned to make it happen? Do we have the resources? Do we have the right technology, the right support, and do we have a plan? Sean, you my friend, you make this happen. I mean, that's your job basically. Your job is to work with customers to make change happen. Would you agree with me if I say incentives are usually the ones that are trickiest, because that can only mean there's politics, behind all of this. What's your take, Sean?
Yeah, I mean, incentives are the driver, right, of a lot of the things that we're doing. But yeah, I haven't read Freakonomics yet, but I think you're spot on with the direction you're headed here.
Yes, and there are a lot of alignment efforts that happen. So think of enterprise architecture generally as practice. By the way, I studied enterprise architecture briefly, and they're trying as best as they can to find alignment by figuring out what the board wants, what the executives want, what are the critical objectives, how do those objectives translate into projects, how are all the performance and success criteria for those projects aligned, and then those trickle down to metrics, and the metrics trickle down to your systems and people and projects and processes. Sounds lovely. How many of you know of a large organization that's able to get this to work well for it? And if so, why do we have all these catastrophes happening in business? Why do we have the Suez Canal getting blocked? Why do we have Colonial Pipeline getting breached? Why do we have any major why do we have shortages, etc.? I'm not suggesting that enterprise architecture is the one solution to all those things, but failures happen in organizations regardless. Fine, not all organizations implementing enterprise architecture, but it's not a problem which is easily solved. I'll give you an example of that. I'm sorry if I'm a military buff. This gentleman over here, he was in charge of about 1 million person organization, and it's in the military. And if you read his book, fun reading if you like military stuff, he basically streamlined the organization. It says, and this is back in the 70s. The technology is not as advanced as it is today. And his idea was, well, if I have 15 layers in order to get to the information, by the time it gets to the top, it's way, way too late. So he really tried to streamline it. Now, point of fun over here, by the way, don't look at him like as a role model. In some degrees, his failure. The guy got exiled. You could argue that he worked for a psycho or psychos. And you could argue that, my own uncle knew the guy, and he says, man, in his 50s, he was still exercised, very energetic, clearly someone who works very, very hard, which doesn't make him clueless. But he is operating within a hierarchy. And that's the most common model you see in organizations. Anyone see this image before, by the way? Yes? Do you know the joke behind it, Sean? A version of, yes. So I'm not going to tell you the joke, but basically it says, those at the top, when they look down, what do they see? And those at the bottom, when they look up, what do they see? But organizations are trying to work around this. Spotify try to do something here. Have you guys heard of the Spotify model where they have squads, groups, chapters, and guilds? Anyone come across that? What they're really trying to do is they're trying to get people to have ways in which they can communicate and get work done, which a typical hierarchy or organization is not able to do. Which, again, I would argue that hierarchy is largely the way in which we do things. Sean, am I off there? Everyone else in the chat, hierarchy is the way it goes.
I think that's what our country was basically built off of.
Most organizations, yeah, you're right. Yeah, in government, although we do have the balance of power, of course, but even then, most organizations have it. Now there are some attempts to change this. Maybe this is what do you want to say here? Tongue in cheek, but Amazon is clearly hierarchical. Google does a bit of matrix management. Facebook is a network, and you can go on YouTube to find out about how people communicate. And there, basically, Facebook uses Facebook to communicate, and it's a fun little environment. Microsoft with their own internal riffs, classic Game of Thrones. And then Oracle, that's poking fun at how that organization has a legal and financial arm, and then the engineering arm, and they're the ones who send you invoices and letters of compliance and so forth. And then you've got Apple, where the CEO, at the time this was taken, I bet you it was Steve Jobs, was very, would you say, prominent there. But do you think you can do better, guys? Here's a book that I actually have. Charles Hugh Smith talks about how there is a tax that organizations levy, or a maintenance cost for the organization. And as the organization scales and scales and scales, that cost increases to the point that it becomes less efficient. So maybe there's a point at which some hierarchy is okay, but after that, it begins to decay. And that organization, remember that the office triangle that we saw, that organization eventually gets recycled. It dies. It's like a Sears that goes out of business, or it's like any other company that eventually dies. And by the way, anyone can recognize the person on the left? Let's just say he's a madman. Do you recognize him, any of you? That's Muammar al-Gaddafi when he was young. He was in charge of Libya, and he was a totally crazy dude, man. If you go and read about him, but part of his craziness, he came up with a model of government where the people are actually the boss, basically like an inverted chart. Instead of the CEO at the top, he is commanded by the people, and the people command their representatives, and their representative command the other representative, and so forth. I don't think anyone has figured this out, guys. If you think you can do better, it's really, really tough. Chances are you're an organization, and it will have the model that we're working with right now. And whatever model you ship, whether it's the previous example or whether it's a hierarchical organization, whatever model you have is, what I came to learn about as Conway's Law, is the product that you will ship. And I have a really nice article also in here where, I forget the gentleman's name, but he said something very, very cool. He says, you will ship your organizational structure. The software that you develop will mirror the capabilities that your organization has. And if you have a monolith organization, you will have monolith software. You will be slow to change. If you have teams and groups and networks, and you basically break it up into microservices, this is how agile you will be. And then he made a nice reference to Bruce Lee. He says, well, if that's the case, and you need to be molded and to evolve as an organization, well, then doesn't it mean that your organizational structure needs to be able to also mold and change? Well, yeah, but that's not an easy thing to do at all. Sean, do you know any organization that's able to do this? An organization which is constantly evolving and surviving no matter what happens to it? I'm not aware of anyone. Can you think of anyone?
I think my closest guess would be Amazon. I think they've done a really good job at evolving, but outside of that, I think it's a tough task for most large organizations.
Yeah, on a long enough time horizon, they fail. I think there's something that says, the top 100 organizations, they recycle, 70% of them recycle every 10 years or something like that. So that tells you that there's an element of evolution. Some organizations are just getting bogged down and recycled. The corollary to that is that there is, in fact, organizations that are very big. Take a look at these guys. Notice anything over here? There is a pattern. Do you see that pattern? And not to you, Sean, to anyone else. These are the largest organizations in the world. I'll give you the hint. They don't have competition. Or they rarely have competition. You could say Walmart and McDonald's do, but most of them don't have competition. Yeah. Now, are you familiar with Dunbars Number? This is actually part of the issue with hierarchies, generally speaking. Dunbar's Number is, I think it came out in the 90s, the idea that you cannot maintain meaningful relationships with more than 150 people. And Gladwell wrote in Tipping Point about Gore-Tex. You guys know Gore-Tex? They make fabrics. In my motorcycle gear, they have fabrics which is breathable, that water resistant. Well, here's what Gore-Tex does. The moment they set up any facility or any building or anything like that, Once it goes over that 150 person limit, they split it up and start a new one, and they found out that things go a lot smoother. Now, this limit is in Meaningful Collection. It's a cognitive limit, and even they've done research. People done research on Facebook. How many people do you know on Facebook, Sean? Thousands, like me, probably, and the same for LinkedIn. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Now, someone researched or ran analysis on their Facebook, what do you call it, network, and they found out that Dunbars number applied. In fact, it was only 150 people that they work with. So eventually, what we end up with is an organization with a network effect where there will be some clustering. But there's another interesting effect. Heard of the Death Star diagrams, guys? Seen this before? This is pretty famous. So, yep, there you go. So, Halo, by the way, that's in the UK. I think they're called now Free Now. And there's, a Twitter over there, and there's Netflix. Do you notice something, guys? Here's one thing I noticed. Do you notice that some APIs and microservices emerge as heavily used? So winners emerge in a network. So if you have an organization as a network, guess what? Some parts of your organizations are going to do more. Some parts are going to be more heavily used. I bet you Sam will answer this. Hey, Sam, if you have 10 APIs out there, would you agree that part of the APIs are used far more heavily than the others? And that's the core of your business, really? Absolutely. Do you know what this is called, guys? This is called the Pareto Principle. It's also called the 80-20 rule. What it really means is that in organizations or any topic of measurement, one half of the output is done by the square root of the number of people. So if in an organization of 100 people, you can argue that 10 people do half the revenue. Sean, you're in sales. Would you say that 10% of the sales force generates 50% of the revenue?
I would say that 20% generates 80%.
There you go. Yeah, which is basically the Pareto principle. That means that the other 10% generate 30%. So you have people at the top absolutely dominating, and everyone else is fighting for table scraps. Guess what the real estate market attrition rate is year after year? Because I'm a real estate agent, by the way, or I was. 83%, amigo. It's one of the highest attrition rates of any industry, because everyone says, hey, I'm going to get in there and I'm going to make some money. And it turns out that no, a few people are really able to do this. True in organizations as well. It can be a serious problem. So even if you have an organization that's in a network, winners are going to emerge, right? And this happens, by the way, in the food that you eat, in the clothes that you wear. You will wear 20% of your clothes 80% of the time. So how will this affect an organism? What if someone was to leave, or what if a business unit is spun out, or what if something changes? Well, the answer came from this gentleman. Another moment of clarity. I was working for a company at the time which was going through a rough time, and you take a look at someone with a bit of gray hair, and he says to you, "Look, an organization is an organism. You have your hearts, your lungs, your liver, etc. Cells regenerate. We will get sick. Sometimes they die, and sometimes they go extinct altogether, and they can only get so big." By the way, guys, I'm not trying to throw cliches at you, but this is a brainstorm. Remember what I'm talking about initially in this call is that all these ideas come to my mind. How do you translate this to the work that you build? When we build APIs and microservices, they eventually die, don't they? You can't make them too complex. They're even just like the organization. Each one of those cells that we have, or an organ is part of that organization. So there are some overlays that you find in there. Let me take a breather here, Sean. Did I confuse you? Am I confusing everybody? Am I giving you drinking from a garden hose where none of this stuff is related?
No, I think you're spot on. There's a lot of similarities between what you're bringing up and the complexities of what folks are doing from an enterprise architecture perspective. I think it goes hand in hand, and maybe it's a different way of looking at things, but I think it's great.
Yeah. And then I will just have one last slide. But what you've seen so far, guys, are I'm summarizing what I came across. It's all things that moments of clarity that I got. This gentleman, by the way, Dr. Agile, PhD, computer science, a friend of mine, by the way. We share the same first name. And even though he started, with how do we build better software, by the way, he's working at Riot Games right now. Yes, Sam, Ahmed Suki, he's a hilarious guy. That guy, I went to Virginia Tech because I'm in Virginia. I went and visited him. Hell of a time. Really, really nice guy. And I think he sold his consulting business to focus fully on Riot. Riot, by the way, when it comes to video games, these guys are amazing. League of Legends, and they're putting out products. They're making billions. A really successful company. It eventually for him too became a focus on the soft aspects. So right now he's talking about business agility. How do you get an organization which learns and discovers, and how that translates to the employees in it, and how that learning and discovery changes the organization and makes it agile and survive. So I will also have some links to some videos he put. And I think really that's it, guys. That's really all I had to share, or all I could over the last 2 weeks from the discussions I have with people and all the observations I have. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope I didn't confuse you. I hope you learned something and discovered something. And yeah, why don't we open up for discussion? I don't claim at all that what I have will solve the world's problems. If anything, you had a laugh. If anything, next time you're in a business meeting, you observe some of those patterns. And yeah. I wish it will make your projects and your successes more likely and your failures less likely.